Welcome to the Seaside Sustainability Podcast, the show that rethinks environmentalism one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Cody, marketing intern at Seaside Sustainability. In this episode, we're diving deep into a lifestyle that's often misunderstood, but incredibly impactful. And I'm talking about zero waste living. What does it mean? Is it achievable? And what small steps can each of us take to reduce our personal waste? Let's find out. Joining me today is Alexa Pavan, or Go Green at Go Green with Alexa, to share their story and help us break it all down. Welcome, Alexa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Cody. I'm really happy to be here.
We're happy you're here too. Let's start by getting to know you a little bit better. Could you introduce yourself and tell us how you first came across the concept of zero waste living? What exactly made it resonate with you?
Yeah, so my name is Alexa, Go Green with Alexa on Instagram and on all the platforms. But I got into zero waste. Honestly, it's a different kind of introduction than most people might have had. I grew up in a really sustainable family. My parents are immigrants from Brazil, so they're naturally geared towards nature, essentially. And they, without even realizing it, they have an affinity for protecting nature and just incorporating that into the daily life. So I grew up composting. And I grew up in the scuba diving industry. My parents had a business, a scuba diving business. So I very much was involved with ocean conservation. And they also grew tropical fruit in our backyard. I live in South Florida, so it was a normal thing for us to do. And since the year-round growing season here, we could take advantage of that. But that's obviously how my parents raised me. And it wasn't until I took that journey into my own hands when I went to college. And I basically realized that, okay, once you live on your own and make your own decisions and you see how other people live, I was like, wow, I'm throwing a lot of my food, my scraps, my fruit and veggie scraps into the trash because I was making all my own food at home. And for the first time, I was making so much of it that I was like, this is all going to the trash can. And I grew up composting. So it killed me to watch that happen. So in college, I decided to get a vermicomposter. And basically, my journey took off from there. My roommates weren't that excited about it, but I think it does make an impact. It did make an impact on them. And I was involved with like a green club at my college. And yeah, it kind of progressed from there. I wouldn't call it zero waste at that time, but it was definitely a journey. And I think that's what zero waste really is.
Wow, so you've basically been involved with environmentalism since the very beginning almost, and sustainable practices. That's just really cool to hear. I think it's just powerful to have such a unique background rooted in the natural world, and I feel like that could inspire a lot of meaningful lifestyle changes, like you mentioned, going from Brazil to college, etc. But now that we know a little bit more about your background, let's define our topic. Zero waste can mean a lot of different things to different people. To you, what exactly does zero waste mean? Is it about literally producing no trash, or is it more of a mindset, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say it's an ideology rather than a prescription for waste management. So I know that that term sounds a little absolute, zero waste, but this movement has transformed and morphed so much over the years. And I would say it started entering people's lives, I think, in the more mainstream way around 2015, where that was the time where people like influencers and things were putting their trash into jars and trying to like minimize their waste, which is a very interesting approach to it all. But it's not a practical lifestyle, right? We can't all live that way. And so my philosophy is more about reducing our waste and being mindful about what we use and what we buy and what we throw away rather than just I don't know, thinking that everything needs to be zero. Like we need to not produce any waste. That's just not realistic in this day and age.
Right, I see. So basically, there's a whole lot of unique ways of going about zero waste. Like you mentioned, people putting things in jars, perhaps making homemade necessities instead of going to the grocery store. And you did mention recycling waste as well. Would you also focus on other principles like reusing or recycling as part of a zero waste plan?
Absolutely. I think that's the only way to go about it. Let me just back it up a little. I think ultimately zero waste, it is an ideology, but it's also like a goal and something we are striving towards. Like it's like saying you want to be healthy. What does being healthy mean? It doesn't really have a definition. And I think that being healthy, that definition changes for each person. So you can see zero waste to be that way as well, where it really morphs into what you want it to be. And I think it's an ideal we're trying to reach for, but we're not trying to aim for perfection. So a lot of that is not just, reducing our waste in a way of like fitting into a jar, but it's being mindful of our consumption and then reusing what we have, repurposing what we have, repairing what we have, all those R's, and restoring like ecosystems. So it's really an all-encompassing strategy and a way of just like thinking about resources differently.
Right. So it can be like a multifaceted approach that can be catered towards and on the individual level. Not everyone would have the same zero waste management strategy. It sounds a bit complicated. Then in that case, how do you explain zero waste to someone who's completely new to the concept? Say I'm a businessman returning from their 9 to 5. How do you explain that to them?
That's a great question. So I would say that zero waste, like I mentioned earlier, is more of an ideal that we're reaching for, and I probably would equate it to that healthy metaphor of like we're just trying to be healthy. We're not, there's never going to be a point really that you just reach healthy and you stop, right? You're constantly striving for this ideal. So I would explain it to them as a way of being conscious of our buying choices, our waste management strategies, and being just honestly conscious of our resources. That's the ultimate thing. It's about being mindful first, and then everything cascades from there. We can make better choices. We can, reduce our waste overall, but it all starts with that mindset first.
Right. Then do you often think that people's expectations of zero waste are often unrealistic in that sense, or in terms of any potential misconceptions around it?
I think it's just the term zero waste sounds a little scary because, you hear zero and you think nothing, right? It has to be nothing. But in reality, it's just like we're just trying to reach that goal. That's the future that we're aiming for because you don't just get there overnight. So I think that in the past, maybe zero waste was seen that way, was seen as an absolute. But I think now as the movement has evolved, it has now become more about imperfect sustainability and incorporating it into your daily life, but in an empowering way, not in a way that feels restrictive or disempowering, I guess, and just like something that needs to be done in your life. It really just is incorporated in a natural way.
Right, that's a really fascinating way to go about it. So it's really about striving towards a more thoughtful way of living, and that it's not really led by a strict rule book, so to speak. It's about an ongoing process adapting to our lives and values. I think I find that personally very valuable. And while we're on the track of any myths and misconceptions, let's bust some of them. I think a lot of people get intimidated by the idea of going zero waste because they picture it as expensive, difficult, or even impossible. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've encountered?
I definitely have heard the part of it being expensive or I guess unattainable. And I want to talk about the expensive part because I think that's the biggest myth. The whole backbone and basis of the zero waste movement, like as it is today, is about doing less, which means buying less, which means spending less money, which kind of negates that whole argument of it's expensive to be zero waste. Zero waste is not about making all these sustainable swaps and changing all your products and things like that. It's about just doing less. And I think we've gotten a little off track in some ways because I think that people, like well-meaning people, are trying to provide alternatives, but in our true consumerist fashion, we kind of go overboard and we think, oh, we need to like hoard all these things and buy all these things today. And it's like in reality, it's like, no, what these people are often suggesting is that next time you run out of paper towels, maybe you don't get paper towels and you get reused paper towels because it's a more sustainable option. Or, next time you're getting you get shampoo, instead of getting like a bottle of shampoo, you get a bar of shampoo. So it's things like that. These are not things that need to be done overnight. I think it should be a slow progression. Like sustainability in general is about slowness, intentionality, and being conscious. And I think that we can't do those things without slowing down, and we can't do that without just being aware of the issues at hand and then thinking about how we already do or don't do these things, right? Because like as I mentioned before, it's about buying less, washing less, doing less, but then also being mindful of those resources. That's like I think the most important thing too is like using what you already have, and that's the most sustainable thing you can do. So I think that that myth of sustainability is expensive is just honestly created by bad actors or people who don't understand what sustainability is and they have a incorrect misconception about it. So I think, and then the other myth of it being unattainable, I think it's because people think that like you have to, like you said earlier, make food at home and things like that. And while I love to do that, I make a lot of food from scratch for sustainable reasons and also for health reasons. I don't think that's something you have to do. As I mentioned, you can cater this to your lifestyle. So if you don't have time to make your own food, maybe you could, just buy less stuff. Maybe you just cancel your Amazon Prime subscription, or maybe you decide to visit your local library instead of buying books from Amazon. And I know I'm really focusing on that one right now, but I think that that's like a low-hanging fruit and something that at least in the US we all kind of can relate to. It's really just zooming out and start thinking about like a swap or a singular issue that's going to solve a problem or a check a sustainability box. It's more about what can I do with what I have and being a little bit scrappy and resourceful and kind of having fun with it. Because I think it's really fun to be creative with what you already have rather than always looking for a product or something to buy to fulfill a need.
No, absolutely. So if you're buying less, if anything, that would be the cheaper alternative, one would imagine. But one of the myths that I've often heard is that zero waste living often requires a complete lifestyle overhaul. A lot of people place a huge emphasis on the amount of sacrifices involved. Say, I actually saw a video where somebody had to make their own homemade toothpaste, but I've heard from what you said, it depends on an individual basis. So is this necessarily true?
I don't think so. I mean, as someone who also has made my own toothpaste, I think it, like I said, it has to be catered to the individual. I think that if you feel like, okay, I'm throwing out a lot of plastic, toothpaste tubes, when when I run out of this tube or like right before, don't wait until the end. I tell people to research beforehand. Since you need something like toothpaste, why don't you do some research and figure out, okay, this is a more sustainable option. I personally use toothpaste tablets nowadays, and that is a way to combat the whole plastic usage. So really, you have to like first really audit your life and kind of take a back seat, like a third party perspective on how you live and your habits, right? So I don't think it has to be like I said, I don't think you have to spend money, but like there are things we're already spending money on, like toothpaste, like deodorant, all these things that we are not going to make at home. It's just choosing a better option and also supporting smaller businesses and businesses that normally care more about you, the sustainable businesses. If they care about the environment, they typically care about the consumer as well, the customer that is purchasing. So I think that it's like, why not? Why not to kill two birds with one stone and just support both of those measures? But yeah, I don't think you have to make your own toothpaste or own products or anything. It just look at your own life and think about ways. If you buy a lot of clothing, maybe you could do a clothing swap. Like there's just so many other options out there.
Right, so it's more about what you can do, not what necessarily you have to do. I've actually never heard of toothpaste tablets before, but I guess I'll have to look into that. So a lot of people aren't used to looking at the big picture, it seems, or even realizing that there are even alternatives based on our current sort of consumerist-based society. In that case, have you ever encountered people who feel guilty about their current lifestyle and think they can't make a difference? What do you say to them?
Yeah, I've encountered both. They're not always the same person, the person who's guilty. Since I make content online, I have family members and things like that that follow me. And sometimes, like, I don't actually talk about it in my personal life because I found that it comes off as preachy, even though it's just something I'm excited to talk about. So I focus on kind of just modeling that behavior. And I've seen that it actually works better that way for me to just do my own living, like how I live normally, and then they just kind of take note and try to do the same thing if they're also interested. But yeah, they've people that have expressed guilt to me, like, oh, I'm not using this reef safe sunscreen, even though I know it's not reef safe, but I, don't have another option, and they're kind of like explaining things to me, and I'm like, look, that's a projection. I, in the most respectful and loving way, that's a projection. I have no judgment to make about it, you know? I think that I do what I can and I focus on my behaviors because that's what I can control. But I think that it's a natural reaction to have some guilt, I think. As humans, when we learn more, we want to do better, right? When we a lot of the time I think we don't know these things. Like that's why I spend a lot of my free time making content online, because I think just these are things that I know, and it's such a normal part of my life. But I found that it's not a normal part of most people's lives, and it feels like they just didn't have the tools available to them. But once they have that knowledge, they're like, wow, I really want to do better and it matters to me. And I think that guilt is just a way to inform us that, wow, we really care. Not to say that guilt is like a good emotion or anything like that, but I think it can inform us onto where like our values lie and how those values inform our actions. So, I have encountered it, but I don't think it's always bad. And I think that it shows that we can improve as a species.
Yeah, so I guess everything is good in moderation, I suppose. A little bit of guilt could go a long way in incentivizing someone to take the zero waste approach route, if that's accurate to say.
Yeah, that's not the way I like to go about it, but I would say that since those people are already experiencing the guilt, I kind of just try to show them that. Like, I was like, you're just telling me these things because you care. It's obvious that you care. And I just kind of try to hold the mirror up for them and show them that, like, I'm not judging them. It's just a judgment of themselves because they know better, I guess. And yeah, it's just a way to like learn more about yourself, I think. And I think even negative emotions can teach us about ourselves and inform us to do better, basically.
Oh, I see. So even if they're perhaps even guilty about not using the best option, I think, if correct me if I'm wrong, that reinforces the theme of what you can do rather than what you have to do, the tools that are available to you, like you said. And I think that just reinforces a really valuable message that zero waste isn't just for the elite or the extreme way of living, but it's for anyone willing to try and to learn. It's not really about being perfect, it's about participating in a manner that's sustainable.
Absolutely. And I love what you said, participation. That is the key. We don't need, there's a quote, and forgive me, I don't know the person, but it's like, we need millions of people doing sustainability imperfectly, not just a few doing it perfectly. And I think that's the best way to sum that up, because we really just need to help each other, morph our current way of living into being more environmentally conscious. And ultimately, like we always say environment, but it's really about human health, right? Because we all live on this planet together. And while we think that we're just impacting the environment, we are part of the environment. And I think that's something that's kind of lost on people when they're first getting into the sustainability movement. They're like, wow, there's a lot about the environment, but in reality, it's a lot about humans. And I just don't want that to get lost. Ultimately, we're trying to survive on a planet that is suffering.
Right, I love that quote, by the way. Millions of people imperfectly doing sustainable practices. All those small steps add up for a huge impact. And speaking of impact, let's talk about the real life impact of zero waste. What are some of your biggest personal wins on this journey? And of course, we've all hit bumps on the road. What challenges have you faced?
Yeah, I'd say the wins are me consistently composting in my adult life. I think that I only recently in the past year started weighing. I use a composting service in my area. I live in an apartment, so I can't really compost at home. So in the past couple of years, I've been using that service, and I weigh my bucket before they swap it out for a new one each week. And I get to see how much, waste I'm diverting from the landfill. And that's all like food scraps and organic material. And it's just been so interesting. I live in a household of just two people, two adults. So it's like, you think that you're just two people, you think you're just one household, but you can we divert 10 to 15 pounds of material each week. And I grew up in a household that composted. So I just think back to all the years of that waste going back to the earth rather than going to the landfill and causing way more havoc than it would otherwise. So I think that's a huge win. I think also being able to change my mind. There's a lot of things that I didn't fully understand. I will say I'm a lifelong diver. I've been diving for over 20 years, and it wasn't until 2023 that I learned about reef safe sunscreen and how to determine if sunscreen is reef safe and things like that. So I feel like while that's kind of a win, that's also like a loss in the all those years that I was not doing it. But it's like I think that changing your mind is the ultimate win. I think that's what the sustainability movement demands of us is being malleable. And like I mentioned before, being creative and all those things require an open mind and require you to challenge your current beliefs. And I think that's the most empowering part of this movement is that like we can learn from each other and we can uh, I don't know, change and evolve and make it fit our own lifestyles individually. And I think that's the biggest win. Because there are new solutions and new things coming out all the time that we have to be aware of and willing to try because a lot of people are like, well, I like what I like and I don't want to change it. That's the really hard mindset to adopt while being like trying to be a sustainable person because being a sustainable person requires you to change your habits. So I think that's a major win for me. And really, honestly, a win for me was starting to make content online because these are all things I did like so naturally. And that's why I ultimately decided to start sharing online because I thought it was such a normal thing to like compost and be mindful of my waste and, be conscious of like preventing food waste and things like that. And when I would bring it up with my peers, people would be like, I don't do that. And so even other people in my life would encourage me, like, maybe you should share this because no one else is doing it and things like that. So that was a hurdle for me to get through. And like, being online and perceived and stuff like that. But I basically realized that we need like so many different perspectives in the sustainability movement. There are lots of creators already out there, but I think just adding more perspectives is a good thing and enriches the movement. And like I said before, we all have to choose our own way. So I think the more perspectives you have, the more you can like tailor it to your life.
Right. So it seems like changing your mind it seems to be the hard step, but it seems like you've always grown up with sustainable practices like composting, for example, whereas it might be a bit of an adjustment for maybe some other people. I personally was a part of a composting project back in high school, and it was certainly an adjustment to make, but I think the change in mindset is really valuable, like you said. And in that case, what has been the most rewarding part of your journey?
That's so difficult because I feel like every day is super rewarding. I think that's why and I do this every day. And although it can be hard at times and there is pushback, I think it's so rewarding to feel like I don't need all these products and things that are being pushed online. I think that like I never really was one for buying a ton of things. Like I'm much more of an experience over things person, but over time I've really leaned in heavily, even more heavily into that. And I've just realized that I don't need stuff to be happy. I really just need people and good food and like the simple things in life. Like nature truly fulfills me and makes me feel whole. I think that's my biggest win and my biggest accomplishment is that I don't need stuff to be happy. And therefore, I don't feel like this FOMO of like, I don't have this, I don't have that. It doesn't really cross my mind. I just constantly thinking about how can I reduce my waste. I'm kind of I like the challenge of and when I say waste, there's just so many things. It's not just like trash waste and things like that, but it's overall just mindfulness. And yeah, I just think that that approach has brought so much fulfillment to my life.
Right. So you can still find a lot of meaning out of, well, minimizing how much waste you produce. How have you dealt with the challenges of finding zero waste options in your area, or is it just spend less and find alternatives if you can?
Yeah, I think in terms of like products and things, I luckily I live in like a metropolitan area, so there's no like shortage of anything, I would say. I live in South Florida, so I'm nestled between Miami and West Palm Beach. I'm very lucky in that way because, there's a lot although Florida isn't known for sustainability, it's we have a lot of different options down here. And besides that, I love to support small businesses. So even if they're not local to me, I try to go local first. But if they're not local to me, I love supporting small businesses I find online and all over the country. So I think that these options are more available than we think. Maybe not always locally, but I think that it does take some forethought. You can't be waiting until the last minute to get a product, I think. which I think for some people it could be stressful. For me, I think it sounds stressful to run out of a product that I use frequently, like something essential like toothpaste, and not have a plan for the next option. I don't know. I already was that person that's like I have what I need and I have a backup of it because I already know that I'm going to run out of it. Might as well stock up on it. So I don't know. It really varies. That I'm just talking about like personal care products at this point. But I think that plays into that slow living mentality and that intentionality of like thinking ahead rather than living this fast-paced lifestyle that's just like we just need to buy the thing and move on. And and that's just like a very it shouldn't be such a quick decision. It should be something that we think about more and consider the impacts because a lot of resources are taken to produce any product or any food that we buy. So I think that it's been beneficial for me to just be slow about it and but also conscious because like I have to be aware, okay, if I'm running low on something, it's time, if I don't have a plan for where I'm getting the next thing, I have to do research and I have to find a way to get the best option available to me. And I think that's why it's great also to have creators online because we can provide those shortcuts for really busy individuals.
No, right. Slow steps are very important, it seems, and it seems like your story and all the progress you made sounds really rewarding and humbling, and even the struggles that you've experienced, they sound like that's where the most creative solutions are born, like how necessity breeds innovation, so to speak. And now for the next step, for someone listening here today who's feeling inspired but maybe a little bit overwhelmed, where should they start? What are some simple, accessible steps to begin reducing waste?
That's a great question. I would say that if I was truly being serious about my zero waste journey and I wanted to become a more sustainable person, I wouldn't do anything at first. I think I would start journaling or at least making a list in my, journal, phone, notes in your phone or wherever, but basically auditing your life and the areas that you spend or consume the most and just being conscious there because a lot of the waste I think that it's hard to say even because I'm thinking about the waste that I produce and a lot of it has to do with food, not food itself but the food packaging I would say. So it's really just being conscious of what we buy and starting there. And if you like, I would think about the frequency in which you throw away your trash. I would start thinking about what do you do with your organic material? What do you do with your glass jars that, are you repurposing those? I would say that start with the audit, and then out of the audit that you have taken, which one is the most frequent or most prevalent on there? So, like, let's say you're throwing out your trash and it's a big kitchen trash can and you're throwing it away every other day. I would start looking in your trash. What's in there? What could you buy less of? What could you do with that material instead? There's lots of other options besides recycling. You could also do like eco bricking, which is when you put thin plastics into a bigger plastic container. And that's just a way of like preventing loose plastics from ending up in our environment. Because even if you put it in a trash bag, there's, the trash bag can break and all these different things. There's just so many solutions, but it doesn't matter what the solutions are. What matters is that because there are solutions for everything, I think for the most part, pretty accessible for most people. But the thing is that you have to be aware of what you're working towards, right? For me, I drink a lot of water, so you know, using a reusable water bottle and having a water filter and all these things, that's what's important to me. I cook a lot of my own food at home, so I make sure that I don't have plastic cutting boards and less plastic overall in the kitchen. It really like you have to see how your life flows and where there's areas of opportunity. But I think that audit is the best way to start.
I see. So starting with an audit and seeing what you can do, that theme once again, what you can do rather than what you have to do sounds like a very individualized way of approaching zero waste. And I also think that's just great advice. And as people always say, you don't really need to do everything at once. Just start small, just stay curious with intentionality, like you say, and then build it off from there. And every habit can create a ripple effect into your other parts of your life, if that's accurate.
Exactly. I think that's completely right. And I also want to mention that, we are individuals, but I know everyone says, oh, what can an individual do? The thing is that you're never just an individual. You are part of a greater community in some form or fashion, whether that's at home in your personal life and you have a larger family, or you have a friend group, or you're part of, your work is tied to a larger community. We all affect one another. And that's why I mentioned the part about modeling behavior earlier. I think the best way to inform change is to, show other people how you're living and not show them, but just do it. And then people take notice without you even trying. And with that, I want to also mention that individual action is really important, but also holding the polluters accountable, like the large corporations that are polluting our environment, that is key. So the way we can do that is to reach out to our elected officials and make it known that we don't like what they're doing and we don't support these businesses and we don't support the fossil fuel industry, and just being very specific about what we don't support and demanding change. There's a lot of legislation going around in different states right now to make polluters pay, for one, and then two, to make polluters be responsible for their waste, as in, like, for instance, Coca-Cola being, putting the recycling on the consumer. We want to reverse that and make it so that that's now Coca-Cola or whatever corporation's responsibility to manage that waste and not destroy the environment. So I really want to harp on the fact that it's not just the individual. We need to also, demand change on a larger systemic level.
Right. So it's not just about the individual. Like you mentioned, polluters and corporations have a huge part to play in terms of the amount of waste being emitted in today's world. In that case, what role do companies and businesses play in the shift towards a zero waste world, do you think?
I think that they could play a big role. And I think that's why I love to support the small businesses that are making change and creating those innovative solutions, because they're like, we the consumers and individuals, we are the ones that are, it's a cyclical matter. So we are buying the products that they're putting out there. But if we stop buying them, that's when these polluters and these larger corporations will have to change their methods and processes. So they play a huge role. And I think whatever company that is maybe a larger one decides to innovate differently and start becoming more sustainable in a true sustainable fashion, not in greenwashing, but rather, actually caring about their impact on the world. I think whatever business does that will make a huge impact on the world overall, but also like our consumer habits. So I think there's a huge area of opportunity for them, but it will involve listening to consumers rather than putting the shareholders and profits in the forefront.
Right. So it's like you said, it's not always on an individual level. In that case, if you could just make one change in the world to make zero waste more achievable for everybody, what would it be? Say that there's a shooting star coming by and you get to make a wish. What would that be?
I would make it so corporations could no longer use single-use plastic. And I know that sounds like just like a simple blanket statement, but I think that would solve a lot of the problems we have in this world. Single-use plastic is hurting our oceans, hurting our bodies. It's like we have microplastics in our bodies, and I think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to find out way more as time goes on. So I think if we could just prevent the use of, single-use plastic, I think that would be a huge help. But that's, my shooting star wish, not my individual person.
Right. So even the simplest solutions are would be the most effective even. Just stop using these wasteful products that are harmful towards the environment. I feel that's such a hopeful and realistic way to frame it. So in essence, zero waste is less about achieving a final destination and more about moving forward with a purpose. It's a mindset. It's not about being perfect. It's just about being persistent.
Absolutely. It will require us to think differently, but I think in the end, it provides a more enriching and connected way of life.
Alrighty, thank you so much for joining us and breaking down all the myths, motivations, and meaning behind zero waste living. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Cody.
Once again, massive thanks to Alexa at Go Green with Alexa. And for our listeners, if you're feeling inspired, start small. Swap one item, share one idea, start one conversation. And remember, progress is powerful. Thanks for tuning in to the Seaside Sustainability Podcast. Don't forget to follow us and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and stay sustainable. This has been the Seaside Sustainability Podcast. Follow us to continue the conversation, and we'll see you next time.